Hi there. Let's get straight to the point. How does one apply to Cambridge? To answer that question, I've broken down this video into 5 key components, namely the major decisions, which are going to be about your course and college, your UCAS application, your My Cambridge application, interviews, and decisions. I'm a third-year chemical engineer at Cambridge, and let's get straight into it. First up, we have the major decisions, of which the first is your course itself. It's really important that you have a little think about what it is that you want to study at university, for the simple reason that it's something that you're going to spend the next couple of years of your life doing. And especially if you do it at Cambridge, you're going to be doing very, very intensely. So you really do need to be sure that it's something that you want to do. And this is where it's a really good idea to read into the specifics of your course as much as you can. What modules can you choose? And do these modules align with the sort of thing that you want to do with your course in the future? The duration of the course is something to look into as well. Most courses are 3 years. That's your typical undergrad course in the UK. Some courses extend into a 4th year, allowing you to graduate with both a master's and a bachelor's. What sort of assessments does this course require? So you have typically at-interview assessments, your pre-interview assessments, which is basically like an entrance exam, or submitted coursework. There's 2 reasons why it's important that you do this sort of additional reading before you apply. The first is that it gives you extra information that you can use in your application to convince admissions tutors that you actually know what you're getting yourself into, and that you're willing to go beyond simply the bare minimum. And this is something that Cambridge is really looking to assess, amongst other things. The second reason is because of the fact that the registration dates can vary a fair bit depending on whether you're applying for things like overseas interviews or certain types of scholarships. Sometimes there can be a lot of deadlines, especially when you've got assessments and interviews and registrations and different forms and stuff to fill in. So it's really important that you do the reading, you get the right dates in your head, and you have them written down somewhere so that you don't forget what they are. Don't make the mistake that I did. When I was applying, I managed to completely miss the deadline for registering for SATs, which meant that I couldn't apply to US universities. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't turn out too bad for me, but you don't really want to miss important deadlines because once you've missed it, it's gone and you're going to have to wait another year. The second major decision that you're going to need to make is which college you're going to apply to. There should be another video soon explaining the intricacies of the collegiate system. But basically, you're going to either make an open application or apply to a specific college. Is there a significant difference in your chance of getting in between these two? Not really. An open application basically means that a computer allocates which college your application gets sent to, whereas if you apply directly to a certain college, your application goes directly to that certain college. It's not really going to affect the teaching that you receive, or like I said, your chances of admission, but it will affect things like where in Cambridge you're based and certain facilities that you might have available to you, including things like funding. So it's probably a good idea to give it at least a little bit of thought. Next up, you're going to want to work on your UCAS application. Now, UCAS is sort of like this big umbrella organization through which you apply to every undergraduate course in the UK. There's one caveat. You can only apply to a maximum of 5 universities at a time, and you can only apply to one of Oxford or Cambridge. There's 3 main components of the UCAS application. There's going to be a personal statement, there's going to be the reference, and there's going to be your predicted grades. Your predicted grades and reference I'm not going to talk about too much because those are things that should be handled by your school without you having to do anything about it. But just saying, it's always a good idea to talk to whoever's doing your reference to ensure that they have an idea of what it is that you're studying and to ensure that it corroborates well with what you've said in your personal statement. Your personal statement is the biggest thing that you need to do. It's basically a 4,000 character essay, which I think works out to roughly 500 words. And it's the only place in your application where you're able to talk about your achievements and your personality outside of an examination setting. So in your UCAS application, you're going to be able to talk about your A-level grades and things like that, but you're not going to be able to talk about any other awards that you may have achieved, your clubs and societies that you're involved with, leadership positions, Olympiads that you've taken part in, all of this sort of thing. There's nowhere else in your application to put it. So working on your personal statement is essential. It's also where you're going to talk about your motivation for the course and try to demonstrate to your admissions tutor that you are well suited for the course. So this is probably one of the most important aspects of your application overall. The deadline for UCAS applications is typically somewhere in January, but for courses at Oxbridge, or if you want to study medicine or dentistry, it's going to be the 15th of October. Again, there may be some instances in which you have an earlier deadline, which is why, like I said earlier, it's essential that you write down your dates, do your research in advance, and make sure that you follow them up. The third chunk of your application is what's known as the My Cambridge application. This is basically a Cambridge-specific application that you submit after you've submitted your UCAS application, and it's basically a chance for the university to collect extra information from you. So this is where they're going to ask you about specific modules that you've studied so that they're better able to target questions towards your ability at interview. This is where you can tell them about aspects of your application unique to Cambridge. There is an optional additional personal statement. I think that's an extra 400 characters or something like that. And this is seen only by the University of Cambridge. So it's a great chance to talk about aspects of the course that are unique to Cambridge, or anything about your application that Cambridge might appreciate that other universities might not, or that you might not necessarily want other universities to have a look at. Once you've made your application and such admissions assessments, it's time for interview. Interviews are basically a chance for your college to get to know you better and to see if you're the kind of student that they want to have. It has been possible in previous years for some interviews to take place before the admissions assessment, and that's what happened when I applied, because I interviewed in Singapore, which happened in October, whereas my admissions assessment was at the start of November, if I remember correctly. But this year, and I think moving forward, most interviews are going to be online, and what this means is that you'll typically have such your assessment somewhere in October or November, and you'll have your interview in December. About 75% of applicants are offered an interview. So this is something worth preparing for the moment you submit your application, instead of waiting to receive an invite, because the invites don't necessarily come very much in advance. You'll get maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks of notice. Finally, it's time for decisions. And decisions normally come out somewhere in the middle of January. There's 3 outcomes to your application. You could be made an offer, which is fantastic. You could be pooled, which means that a different college will then review your application. It basically means that the college you applied to thought that you were great, but they didn't necessarily have the space to take on another student. So they passed it on to a pool where other colleges can dip in and look at applications. And if they like you, they can make you an offer themselves. So this process can take a week or 2. Or there's a third option. You could be rejected, or rejected after pooling. That's basically it. For those of you who are more interested like I am, there's plenty of admission statistics for previous years that you can have a look at, sort of by year of admission, by course, and by college, and things like that. You can also see data such as how many applicants there were, how many were made offers, and how many of them actually took up their offers or met their offer criteria. A word of caution though, I wouldn't read too much into this data. It doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Things have changed in the past couple of years, particularly with COVID, and it's likely to be completely irrelevant to your own application. Remember that each application is assessed on a case-by-case basis. But if you're someone like me who enjoys knowing as much about the application process as possible and just loves looking at numbers and trying to make inferences and things like that, that is something that you can do. And just a final word of advice. As stressful as it may seem, try to enjoy the process.